Read-aloud, Volume 3, Chapter 4, Part 3, The Demonic Method. Some 15 minutes after his declaration of war against fate, they were in the gloomy forest when Ram murmured offhandedly, "Well, you certainly talked a good game." Ram was walking beside Subaru, looking up at him as he struggled on an area with poor footing. "It is difficult to hide my dismay at how much dead weight you truly are." Do you even know what the word hide means? If you let the other person know what you're hiding, what's the point? And so, Subaru made light of Ram's grandiose, high-handed declaration, adding a sigh at the end. Subaru and Ram were in the forest of the demon beasts, walking around and searching blindly for Ram. Consciously slipping past the barrier and walking their way deep into the forest was Ram's idea, knowing full well the nature of the demon beasts. Normally, they never got close to the village because the barrier hurt them, leaving the mountains as their habitat. Naturally, Ram ought to have headed there with the aim of wiping out the beasts. That said, the fact that they're just game trails makes it tough going. "You may not be accustomed to this, but our meager progress is unacceptable. Truly." "Wait, don't leave me behind that quickly. I understand how you feel, but just a little longer." Ram's maid outfit might have been wholly out of place for going hiking in the mountains, but her practice gait made her marching twice as fast as Subaru's. To Ram, full of concern about her younger sister, matching Subaru's slow-footed pace was 100 cons and no pros. At the very least, he couldn't restore his good name by moving so slowly. "I'm walking wounded with a blood shortage, so I'm getting tired easily. Come to think of it, I didn't have a Meliaton telling me to come back soon either." "If you have yet to say, 'I'm back,' last night's 'come back soon' remains in effect." It, works that way?" Subaru tilted his head at Ram's sophistry and thrust the sword in his hand into the ground like a cane to support his shaky legs as he chased after Ram. He had borrowed the sword he was using in place of a cane from the young men of Eroam village. Subaru had a hard time forgetting the look on the face of the young man representing the others the moment he told them he was heading into the demon beast forest. He had been shocked, and when Subaru brushed off his cries to stop and partially explained the circumstances, the young man lent Subaru his sword. The sword, supposedly the finest in the whole village, was a simple one-handed blade. Even an amateur like Subaru could manage to swing it. He had accepted the weapon, and the villagers had sent them off. But that wasn't the only thing they had provided him. "Inside this pocket are candy, a pretty stone, and... Whoa! There's a bug in here!" Subaru let out a cry as rummaging through the pocket led to touching something fairly disgusting. Freed from cramped quarters, the winged insect escaped from Subaru's hand. He watched it fly into the forest. "Just like those little brats to slip something like that in there. I'll give them a good sermon later." "It is proof that they adore you. What do they see in you?" "The sincere eyes of children see how my manly nature sparkles before them. Besides, you're well aware I'm not the only one they like, right?" Subaru sought Ram's agreement, and Ram concurred. "I suppose you are right." Subaru looked quite satisfied with that, nodding several times. Ram, too, had seen the children toying with Subaru before they left the village. Subaru connected heart to heart whenever he could. To Ram, that was something she only wished she could do. After the young men had seen them off, Subaru and Ram had been caught by the freshly awakened children. Wanting to thank Subaru and Ram in person, the children had stuffed one sign of their affection after another into his pocket as soon as they noticed him. The piece of candy, the pretty stone, even the bug. These were the children's gratitude in physical form. Subaru could not treat them lightly. The bug had gotten away. Subaru repeated what the children had said with smiling faces as he wavered under the pressure of unnecessary gratitude being pushed onto him. Bring back Remren so we can thank her too. Huh. Where was Rem at that moment? How dangerous a spot was she in? Why was she fighting at the risk of her life? The children didn't know that. They didn't need to know. After all, don't worry, you little brats. I'll make sure she's right there with her big sister to lecture you about being bad kids for going into a dark forest to play without saying a word to anyone. You should probably join them as the stupid boy who'd make trouble for everyone by rushing headlong into the woods and turning into a human chew toy. Wouldn't it be fun to kneel for a lecture from the village chief all night? Naturally, drawing up that image of the future in his mind brought a twist to his lips. Then, in contrast to the odd grin on Subaru's cheeks, Ram stopped walking forward. She quietly lowered her head, speaking in a commanding tone without looking back. Barasu, wait a little. I'll be using clairvoyance. She turned toward the silent forest. Subaru felt like sound itself had vanished as he rushed to Ram's side. He drew his sword from its scabbard as he looked around cautiously. He couldn't let his guard down. Her Ram was defenseless while she was using her clairvoyance. Ram lowered her pale face as she silently concentrated on clairvoyance, also known as the sight of 1,000 eyes. She explained it as a power that could borrow the vision of other living things, and not limited to people either. By reading the vision of creatures with compatible wavelengths and using the vision of yet other creatures to further expand her range, she was literally able to look around with 1,000 eyes. Ram had used that power to scry the forest several times since they had entered, but she had yet to locate Ram. Apparently, the sheer abundance of life made it rather difficult. However, Barasu, there are eyes watching us once again. They came, huh? Should I just walk in front? Seeing Ram nod while keeping her eyes shut, Super inhaled a little and realized his heart was pounding hard. He gently stepped forward on the grass, leaving the defenseless Ram by herself and making his way up a moss-covered boulder. He stood on top of the rock and took a deep breath. He banged the iron scabbard against the hard surface of the boulder. As the sound echoed, the forest rustled right in front of him. The silence was broken as the sounds of running across the ground and unified howls thundered against Subaru's eardrums. He instantly looked back to see a black, four-legged beast above his head, leaping out from among the trees. Its fangs were bared and aimed at Subaru's throat, pouncing on Subaru's slow reaction to rip him to shreds. Subaru instinctively used both hands to protect himself. The wild beast's speed outpaced his own. Its maws opened wide as it closed in right before his eyes. Just before the tips of his fangs were about to easily puncture Subaru's flesh, bringing blood and his very life gushing forth, a blade of wind struck it in the flank, slicing it neatly in two, slaying it instantly. The front half kept going and collided hard with Subaru and sent him flying. Whoa! An exasperated-sounding sigh reached Subaru's ears. I simply cannot understand why you lose your nerve at the sight of a single one of them, Barasu. Unfortunately for Subaru, he ended his flight by hitting the slope and rolling downward. He stood up, wiped off his scraped-up butt, and glared defiantly at Ram, who was still looking down at him from the top of the hill. Hey, you! You can cut that a little less close, can't you? Ram twisted her lips as she tossed him a nonchalant line. I was too concerned about killing it with the least amount of suffering to think about your needs, Barasu. Subaru looked at the body lying beside him. It was already a lifeless corpse. Even though he knew it was a dangerous creature, the thought of a living being lying dead like that tugged at his thoughts. Subaru gently brought his hands together in a prayer. Your heart will not hold up if it breaks over a single creature. All the more so because your life is forfeited if they are not annihilated, Barasu. Hunting it like this was your idea, was it not? Let me have my hypocritical sentimentality here. Geez, it's important for my own peace of mind. It wasn't so much an issue of sentimentality as it was growing up in different worlds. Subaru couldn't exactly claim to be a man of deep faith, but he did revere life. His awareness of its value had grown a little stronger over the course of Return by Death. So, did you find Rem with your clairvoyance earlier? No. Unfortunately, she seems to be deeper in the forest. Like just now, it is proving difficult to concentrate on a location with the Urigarum sporadically targeting you, Barasu. Ram put a hand to her cheek as she said it, looking mystified at how the demon beast went straight for Subaru. Subaru had a vague suspicion that he knew the answer, but he couldn't bring himself to say it directly. He was weak. With Subaru's lips sealed, Ram glanced back and forth between him and the beast. I suppose it is because you are weak. And that's what you come up with? That's rude. It is because you are easy prey, then. That's a distinction without a difference, Big Sis. Ram shrugged. Subaru slumped his shoulders. It was hard to tell if Ram meant those words or was just needling him. Probably the latter. Lone demon beasts had attacked them a few times since entering the forest. Either way, Ram had been using magic to strike down the ones targeting Subaru. It was Subaru who'd established the surefire hunting method. They'd always went after Subaru, even when Ram was defenseless while using clairvoyance. At first, Ram had her doubts about it, but that was then. Subaru half-heartedly thought that now was a good time as ever to bring up a different subject. Can I ask you what hornless means? He kept wondering about the term he'd abruptly heard just prior to entering the forest. He could guess up to a point. Ram took the word in as she continued looking down at Subaru from above. It is what it sounds like. A disparaging term employed by fools to mean a demon without a horn. The word demon brought to mind the sight of Rem from the night before. He would never forget the sight of her, covered in blood, laughing hysterically with a white, faintly glowing horn on her forehead. She looked like a demon straight out of the fairy tales. And Ram had called herself hornless. In other words, Ram's forehead. I had lost my one and only horn in a minor skirmish. I've had to rely on Rem for everything ever since. Probably was a bad thing to ask, huh? Why? As Subaru scratched his face, Ram tilted her head as if she was genuinely mystified. Well, I don't know how big a horn is to someone who's a demon, but I'm guessing it's a pretty big deal. I thought it might have been pretty insensitive to ask. Even if that is the case, there is no getting it back now. Well, you can rest easy. Ram spoke down at Subaru, putting him back in his place before lightening her tone very slightly. I may have not been calm about it then, but I am now. I lost my horn, but I gained a second life in its stead. I suppose that is not what Rem thinks, however. Her voice had a painful overtone before she cut things off, a wave of her hand indicating her intent. She was entering clairvoyance again. By the time Subaru climbed up the slope, Ram was already deeply enmeshed in viewing the world through the eyes of others. Ram's eyes were closed, her breath ragged, and she had a considerable cold sweat on her brow. Both of her legs trembled, looking like she'd run them ragged over the course of the long day. More than once, she looked like she was getting dizzy and was about to totter over. Using clairvoyance to borrow the vision of other beings simply put that great a strain on her body. But no matter how painful it was, not the slightest sound of weakness passed through Ram's lips. When you really got down to it, Ram and Rem were twins who greatly resembled each other. If pushing themselves hard was what it took, they'd do it without a moment's hesitation. When you considered Amelia and Beatrice as well, the mansion's girl squad prioritized others just a little too much. Man, this makes me feel even guiltier for being a weakling. He kicked the grass at his feet. That was a major miscalculation, for a piece of grass slipped into his mouth and the dirt flew right into his eyes. Spitting out the earth-tasting grass, he cursed his own extremely hesitant nature. But he relaxed a little, thinking that even such stupidity was fitting for him. Even though he knew it wasn't a good thing to disturb Ram's concentration while in clairvoyance, he asked, "Ram, you're worried sick about Rem, right?" Ram, her concentration focused on aligning herself with other people's vision, pleadingly replied, "Of course I am. Certainly, that girl is much stronger than me, but that is no reason not to worry." "Yeah. Even if she's better than I am at everything, I am still her older sister. That will never change." Until then, Subaru had seen Ram as someone who used her younger sister for the sole sake of making things easier on herself. He'd gotten it all wrong. Calling it a foolish misunderstanding didn't come close to cutting it. Ram understood her own position far more keenly than Subaru ever had. She was well aware that she couldn't live up to Ram's constant boasts. Subaru, seeing how Ram had accepted it, could only harden his own resolve. He scratched his head, murmuring as he stretched to loosen up. "I really figured we'd have met up with Rem by now, but..." Maybe Ram felt how Subaru seemed unable to calm down. At any rate, she abandoned her fruitless clairvoyance and brought her mind back in full. She promptly put her sweaty hair in better order as she cast Subaru a suspicious glance. "Barasu, what do you plan on doing?" "The way things are, I'm just baggage, exactly as you said. I told you before we headed into the woods. I'm gonna make myself useful and help save Ram." He wasn't waiting to be sure of his guess, but based on prior events, he gave it about 70-30 odds in his favor. Of course, the remaining 30% weighed heavily on his mind, but... "I've got to play the hot hand here. Ram, you ready to cross a somewhat dangerous bridge?" "I am alone with a young man in a forest full of demon beasts. As a maiden, there's surely no greater danger." "Oh, now you've said it, sister." Subaru laughed, then took a deep breath and reopened his eyes. If Subaru's thought proved true, he could turn the situation around. Even though he knew it was necessary, it didn't quell the fear in his heart. He knew he was a scaredy cat. Even so, there were some things he couldn't run from. If Subaru was right, this was one of them. "Ram, actually, He began to speak of return by death. Subaru acted like he was about to break the taboo, putting into words that which it was forbidden to convey. Before his eyes, Ram looked like she was wondering what Subaru was saying when her expression froze. No, time itself had stopped. The world lost its color. Sound vanished. and the very concept of time came to a grinding halt. It was a world where everything had stopped. Suddenly, the sole exception to the rule appeared. There you are. His murmur did not actually create a sound, but he hoped his invective still reached that which hovered before his eyes. If even a fraction of his emotions communicated, that would give him great satisfaction indeed. In the frozen world, the only thing unaffected was the black cloud. The cloud that had suddenly emerged before Subaru shifted into a silhouette of an arm to cause bluff. It formed fingers, then a wrist. The biceps emerged to complete a full right arm. Though the previous arm hadn't even reached an elbow, this one materialized all the way up to the shoulder. Subaru's breath felt like it caught inside him as the cloud, more distinct than the first time around, slid its black fingers forward. They moved past the thin flesh of his chest, stroked his rib cage, and went straight toward his heart. Even though he knew it was coming, there was no way he could endure the pain so far past his limits. He had no words with which to express the mad screams inside his head from the feeling his heart directly grasped. The long suffering, the time of unbearable anguish, continued. His heart rhythm was thrown off. His blood flow was cranked to the limit, making his entire body scream out. It was such torture that he felt like he was gushing tears of blood, biting down on his teeth hard enough to break them. For Subaru, the only thing he could sense in this world was pain. All he was allowed to do was continue to writhe. The agony seemed to last for eternity, as his field of vision was dyed pure white. Barisu? When he heard his nickname, Subaru realized he had fallen onto his knees and butt. He hastily wiped off the saliva that had spilled from the corner of his lips and rose back up. Man, daydreams are bad stuff. It is because you forced yourself back from injury too soon. If it is too hard, you should return to the village. If you have some other way to find Rem, at least tell me that before... Before completing her sentence, Rem gasped, and her expression changed as she looked all around the area. The only sounds were those of the quiet forest, tree branches swaying from the wind and leaves rustling as they rubbed against one another. Ram listened carefully as she looked back at Subaru. What did you do, Barisu? I rolled the dice a little, pain and all. Despite how extreme the pain had been, not even a single trace of that remained in his body at the moment. Even as Subaru silently reviled the wounds carved solely into his mind, he was grateful for the saving grace that his body still had enough endurance with which to act. After all, within the deep, verdant foliage, the rustle of the wind began to lose its tranquility. Ram frowned and looked to her right. The wind is astir. The scents of beast approach, many of them. He looked that way, too, and saw multiple red points of light approaching from deeper in the forest. Based on the number of eyes, there were about 5 demon beasts running their way. Ram made a small click of her tongue. And we haven't even found Rem yet. Well, don't worry about that. She's not that far, so we'll hook up soon enough. How can you be certain of such a thing? Subaru shrugged in the face of Ram's sharp gaze and rebuke. Rem's goal is to wipe out the demon beast here in the forest, right? As long as I'm here, they're going to keep coming to try to eat me. That'll bring Rem running straight to me in time. He'd been thinking it from the beginning. He'd also thought it strange from the beginning. Why did the demon beast prefer Subaru as their target for the curse during every loop? When Subaru repeated those 4 days, the demon beast always cursed Subaru when they'd met at the village. That wasn't so much unavoidable fate as the operation of some other compulsion. Subaru's existence provoked a reaction from the demon beasts. Subaru deduced the answer as to why from the exaggerated reactions he'd received from other sources. In other words, it's the stench of the witch. Demon beasts were enemies of all mankind created by the witch, and they seemed to be intensely sensitive to Subaru, who carried the scent of the witch. That was no doubt why they'd gone after him and not Ram, since they had entered the forest together. If all it took was a whiff of the witch to compel the demon beast to appear, he'd make full use of that. He'd lure every demon beast in the forest to put their curses into Subaru, a grand feast that would bring Rem running in after them. He called it Operation Subaru Chew Toy. When he'd previously tried to tell Amelia about Return by Death, Beatrice had made an offhanded comment in the aftermath that gave him the clue he needed to draw up his plan. Apparently, the appearance of the dark cloud had thickened the stench of the witch hovering around him. That haze was probably related to the witch in some way. Somehow, the scent of the witch around Subaru was related to the power behind Return by Death, but it was not the time to think about such things. All he had was anguish he could not speak of to anyone, ferocious pain without anyone who could hear him complain. In the face of fast-approaching danger, the sheer exhilaration of turning the tables on the hand fate had dealt him made the corners of Subaru's lips warp into a malevolent grin. Yeah, I finally shot an arrow off at fate for putting this loop together. Cheering inside his mind, he re-gripped his one-handed sword, positioning himself to face the oncoming tide. And to Ram, who stood by his side, he stated in a high-pitched voice, "So, since you're super reliable in a fight, please and thank you for that. After this, when you look back objectively at what you said, please beg me to kill you." A sigh trailed behind Ram's voice as she slammed a blade of wind into the throng approaching from the front. The cast had been changed for round 2 in the battle against the demon beasts.